We are here in front of the index of the exhibition. Before we go maybe more into details of that, I would actually like to go 10 years back, or even more than 10 years, and that you tell me about what was Potosi Principal original exhibition, and then let's move from there to Archive, where we are now.
When Manolo Borjaviel invited us to do a project, our first crazy idea was to loan images from Potosi and ask our artist friends to answer to them. What was very naive, because we couldn't see how complicated the process of loaning was. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you say that you invited artist friends. That's also something I thought about. How did you, the way you made exhibition is really not a typical curating.
And we have to start with correspondence, and they, like a snowball effect, can invite people. So at least it was also the idea not only to invite friends, so also outside of our circles, to find or to have correspondence with people that we don't know.
But I think also this, that you claim that you worked with friends, and then friends of friends, and expanding your knowledge and contacts in a way. There is something about claiming community in building the exhibition. There is something about claiming the process, also not from your exclusive authorial position, but to build a community around certain subject, which I think it's really different than kind of a regular way of doing exhibitions, and not just different, but really politically important. Would you agree?
Indeed, you are right. There is a politic of friendship, which we underline very much. And Andreas is right. There is some kind of anti-institutional attitude in it.
Yeah.
Because especially now, in the Corona times, institutions were so paralyzed somehow.
But let's go back then to the Potosi Principal original exhibition, how it was organized in 4 chapters, and you took them now. And I would like you to talk about the chapters originally, and also these quotes that are kind of titles for each chapters coming from Communist Manifesto.
The 4 chapters we did in the Potosi project was at first about primitive accumulation and its continuity. The second chapter was about human rights, and that it is some kind of placebo which you can use as a government to cover your criminal economic politics. And then the third one was the role of art as a kind of complice in this play. And the 4th chapter, The World Upside Down, was on one side a way to look out what resistance we can imagine. And when we did the archive, it was very clear that we have to change them. Yeah. And in between, the financial crisis came, which was one reason to change the primitive accumulation and think about the tendential fall of the profit rate then. And all of that, such a lot of things changed, and the main reason to do this archive was to revise these 4 chapters.
And this brings us to what I mentioned before, but we didn't talk about it, Communist Manifesto. And that chapters are still kind of named from quotes from Communist Manifesto, chapters addressing human rights, primitive accumulation, art, and the world upside down. But you have these quotes, but they start with as if. So there is a certain, I would say, reservation towards Communist Manifesto, mixed with admiration. And also some temporal displacement, as if that is what we see. But I would really like you to talk about it.
The Communist Manifesto is one of the most precise analysis of capitalism you can have. And how it is combined to the worker movement is very touching now to see.
Would you say that this as if that you added to the quotes kind of address this limitation of analysis that is fixed on progress and unlimited resources?
On one side, yes, but on the other side, it is because the Communist Manifesto is so descriptive. Therefore, as if is on one side, okay, we have to be a little bit careful with the Communist Manifesto. And on the other side, it is an admiration about the painting.
Yeah. Also, I think the motif of as if we found in a lot of projects, if people make graffitis or occupied forest, they say is a kind of Nochwald, it's a kind of yet forest or a yet city or a yet cityfied, because they know the temporality and the urgency at the same time.
A lot of these things are condensed in a logo that you devised for the archive. So maybe you can describe it. I think it really gives a lot of insight into.
There are logos of the 4 chapters, but there is also a logo from the Archive. And if you compare it with the logo of the Principio Potosi, we turn on the other side the mountain now in a hole. The most mining projects in the world are now open mines. And you see here kind of spiral, and you see small camiones, trucks, because they look like plague toys because of the dimension. And then you have these kind of 2 columns of the Spanish crown, that is Aragon and Castile. And you have between the plus ultra the line of hanging people, and here you see workers, people who are bankrupt, and the last people are reduced on their brain production. Here you see now the sun and the moon. That was also this kind of quotation from the nature religion.
The logo gives kind of insight into scope of subjects and ideological and political debates behind them. And here behind us is the index that is supposed to help us navigate the archive. I would like you to, the archive is obviously extremely complex, and it contains various materials, letters, documents, texts, excerpts, artistic works, facsimils of artistic works. Can you talk about how did you what does archive contain, how did you organize it, and how do you expect people to navigate it?
Maybe I can stand up and explain like this. What you see here is a kind of wallpaper, but you have it also in this index, which is describing all the brochures and its chapters. As you see, the exhibition is structured with all these threads. Some threads have very different way of spinning. So you have these threads for the chapters. This is a special thread which is going to Bartolomé Arzán de Osuna y Vela, and a special chapter of it where a cat is getting rabbits. Here you have the cut-out thread. This with the knots is about list instructions and plans. This curled is about from the interviews and conversations. So even the threads are structured in some different ways, and I guess this is also this kind of overproduction of pleasure you have in the archive. If you are thinking about this kind of index, you are thinking about more poetry than that it is some kind of efficient tool. It is a mixture between poetry and tool.
I only want to add that although we know it looks crazy, but with craziness express something. And these kind of things are for us also important as a kind of artistic practice.
The core of your archive are 36 booklets that address topics that some of them we mentioned in this conversation. But there is also something about this need to provide the space in which this complexity could be discussed also as in a social space of exhibition, and to question the very notion of both what exhibition is, what kind of memory exhibition carries, how does it live in time, and also what archive is. I mean, I don't think that people could really follow the threads the way you devise them. It's kind of your mental map of the archive, but still there is a level of orientation. I also don't think that people would necessarily read all 36 booklets, but something else happens in the exhibition.
Every exhibition has also a kind of acting or performative character that it could show you how it could be if you don't have any regulations, if yourself would have a lot of time to sit here and so on. And I think every exhibition is like that.
Yeah.
This kind of as if. It is also a kind of thing about emancipation. This is what we all the time witnessed when we were doing exhibitions, that institutions think they could think how the spectators are doing their reception. And all the time you have these communication departments in institutions which are saying, no, audience is listening only... what was it in the 80s? 10 seconds? Yeah?
8 seconds.
8 seconds. And maybe we come then to the soup can of Warhol, because that is a typical Warhol thing. Only 8 seconds is the audience looking paying attention to an artwork.
But yes, this brings us to the piece by David Reeve, which addresses Michael Lifshitz and his philosophical position on art, and his criticism actually of pop art and specifically Andy Warhol, and how this making it simple, making it graspable comes from a certain position of privilege in which your artistic tiredness is kind of translated into the world.
If our soup can could speak like in Andersen's fairy tale, it might say, I am a simple soup can, and I am speaking to whoever might hear. I am telling you that you have abandoned true happiness ever since you left the state of elementary, lifeless matter. But your chief crime and your greatest misfortune is that you think at all. To be done with this hell on earth, with all these ideas and all this responsibility, that is the ideal of modern man. Be as simple and irresponsible as the stupid piece of tin from which the machine made you. Verily, I say unto you, come to me, all you afflicted and all you burdened with so many sorrows, and I shall soothe your woes.
I also wanted to ask you about the piece of Dmitry Gutov, which is also referring to Lifshitz.
Yes. We asked Dimitri also to start a correspondence to this Aquarell of Dürer from 1525, and he answered this in a painting on a very thin material, and he took this image from a Japanese drawing from the same period from the Dürer, and he wrote a text by hand by a dream of Lifshitz. In late 1937, I fell ill with typhus with a very high fever. In my delirium, I thought that a special unit in green caps, like the ones worn by the unit that carried out the search in the Marx Engels Institute in 1931, was using a flamethrower to burn down apartment after apartment on Ustachev Street, in the dormitories of the Institute of Red Professors.
in talking with David Riff as well with Dimitri Gutyov and Studilat for the Archive project, we mentioned or we reminded that the second world doesn't appear in the discourses anymore.
Now when I was listening to you, I thought maybe one blind spot of Archive is actually primitive accumulation in post-socialist countries of Eastern Europe and Soviet Union, because you do talk about Stalinist times and Soviet times, but what is with post-Soviet times? What is with countries like Yugoslavia? What is with countries like Poland? And really primitive accumulation that went under the name of transition in the 90s. Right. That is something that nobody is specifically interested in anymore, but me as somebody who carries this history, I think it's also really something we should look at. It is a specific form of primitive accumulation that was happening in the heart of Europe with some decades before it spread everywhere. What we see now is something that we experienced actually 30 years ago.
We talked with David about special images of primitive accumulation, and we started to look at the photographs of Rodchenko he did during the Weißsee Canal as a kind of industrial project, and the photos.
And Rodchenko taking photos, being sent there, and being at the same time avant-garde artists, totally aligned with the progressive political position, and then taking photos of a huge enterprise that was actually one of the first instances of using prison labor as economic force. So really this contradiction of being an artist. And is this contradiction also a reason why you have in your chapters art as one chapter, but then the world turned upside down, which is also which for me entails, and for you I guess entails also some utopian promise, as separate?
First, I think with this motif world upside down is not only the utopian thing, it's also coming from the sources from the conquista. As the accusation of the chronist was that the Spanish, what they talk, and this kind of humanity, Christianization and better life, and what they act, it was completely different. And so for them they say, this world that you are telling us it's world upside down.
It would be too easy to say, the art system is horrible, and let us then go to the graffiti scene and then we are fine. Especially in the Potosi archive, we have some touching documents which are actually a kind of plaidoyer for doing art. If I think about Studilat, it is a plaidoyer about doing art in the community now in Russia. The urgency of their agenda is because art institutions are so incapable to shelter these artists now. Then if we go to the world upside down, then you have this kind of art which is connected to another community and also to another kind of artistic doing. At least we met Tobias Morawski, and he was doing also an archive about the graffiti movement, movements in the town, self-organized cultural centers, self-organized dance floors, and so on. He's going with the black paper to his friends and asked them to draw their utopian structures on this black paper.
You see some of these drawings of the groups he asked for, and they try to make this kind of mapping of their networks, and this is also kind of mirroring this kind of big table, you can say.
And I find it really beautiful that you installed it as a light.
Yes.
So it also, this utopic moment, which is both banal but also profound, and which is entailing care for others and sharing the pleasure and doing the work together, that this is what sheds light on everything else. I find it is a really beautiful metaphoric gesture.